Oh, you're cutting. Shane, shut up. All right, everybody. So we're gonna kick on. So just a last call for votes. If you haven't got your vote into Kelly, please do that now. And up now we have Mark Gregory to present National Broadband Network, a nation-building project. So welcome and thank you, Mark.
Okay, I'd like to first of all thank the association for inviting me along. Many of us here, of course, are technical people, so there are some bits that I'll go through fairly quickly with the understanding that we have a good knowledge of what I'm talking about. There will be probably some questions or some arguments. The NBN is something that, of course, has provoked a lot of discussion. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick wind through some of the key points and talk about, at the end of it, the future and what we should expect to see happening next. So that's my statement of what is the NBN. And it's not a government statement or the former government statement. That's what I consider to have been the need in the year 2005. So that's about 11 years ago from now. It's all about providing the connectivity and the network that we need if we want to actually participate in the global digital economy. When I was in high school in Perth, and I left Perth a long time ago, but when I was in high school in Perth, we had an invited talker along to us, and I think I was doing my matric in '79. And this gentleman came along and he said, look, in 30 years from now, 80% of the population will be creating content for the 100%. Only 20% of the population will be growing food, making cars, doing things. 80% will be involved in the information industry. Now, we're getting towards that now. We're moving in that direction. So if we don't have a network in Australia that's going to provide every opportunity, then we're going to miss out on this digital economy. And Mark, two ways about it. Every country in the world is our competitor, right? So you need to keep that in mind. And it's not just for us, it's also for the next generation and the generation after that. So the history of it, we should all be very familiar. We've had a number of promises and a number of stops and starts, and we've just seen yesterday there was a document released by NBN Co, which quite amazingly didn't agree with what the Minister and the head of NBN Co has been telling us for the last 6 months, because this document tells us that the rollout will continue into 2021. But they've all promised that it will be 2019, and then they promised 2020, and now shorter, faster, cheaper, copper, crap, 2021. And it's still blowing out. So let's just keep that in mind. So if you want to, Google it. You'll see that there was a new fibre and other rollout plan that was released in the last couple of days. And it's got 2021 installations on it. So, as I said, the NBN is all about staying in front of our competitors, but it's also about providing us with something that we haven't had in Australia before. And that's traffic class management and the use of techniques that have been built into systems since the 70s, but have never been turned on by our telcos. In other words, traffic class management, management for congestion, capacity management, and so on. And so really that's what it's all about, was that taking us to that next level and providing us with networks that we learn about in high school, we learn about doing our CCNA, we learn about in university, but when we go to work, you go, well, 802.1p and so forth, why isn't it turned on? Oh, we don't do that in this company. We just treat everything as best effort, traffic class 4. And, you know, we all get very disappointed. So the NBN is really about taking us from where we were to the next level, to the next generation, right, to the future. It's a bit like going from a combustion engine car to an electric car, with or without driver, right? It's moving from one technology to the next. Key part of it, of course, was the transit network. There's been a lot of controversy about this transit network and also the 121 points of interconnect. Originally, the idea was that there would be a number, about 28 to 32 points of interconnect, that NBN Co would be permitted to have connectivity between those points of interconnect, and that it would then hook into the bigger network. And of course, we've seen it all go bad from there. They decided that there'd be 121 points of interconnect, and then they banned NBN Co from actually connecting between those points of interconnect. And so it's just an absolute nightmare for NBN Co to actually manage this 121 different networks. And we're already seeing teething problems because the satellites have been going up and down very rapidly recently, right? They've been failing badly. And that's not because of the satellites, but because of the systems on the ground. So we've been seeing problems right across the board with NBN Co systems. So the transit network is controversial for other means, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Yep.
Do you reckon we need a submarine cable across the up there?
Sounds like a really good idea, but of course there are mining company cables that go out around here and all over the place, right? But they're not allowed to, in essence, NBN Co is banned from actually utilising any of that, right? Now, the whole point of it, of course, is that we've got these network design where we've got the points of interconnect, the different little networks, aggregation points, you know, where we're connecting into the homes. So we delineate between the NBN network and everything else out there. The connections to the RSP networks, this is where one of the controversies has been from the very beginning, because if you don't have fibre into those points of interconnect, then you've got to buy access onto someone else's fibre. In some locations there's lots of fibre available, but in other locations there's only two fibres available. One which is Telstra, one which is government owned, but it's being operated by NextGen. The interesting thing about the stuff that's being operated by NextGen is that NextGen are being paid to operate it, but none of it's lit up. So they're being paid a couple of $1 million to operate it, but the only traffic that's occurring is on the Telstra fibre. Because it's regulated, because there's only two companies offering fibre into the POI, you get the same price on either fibre. So of course, whenever they say, well, we need connectivity into that POI, they just simply say, well, we'll put it onto the fibre that's lit up, the Telstra fibre. So we've got a ridiculous situation occurring where there's supposedly some competition, but there isn't with that environment. And West Australia is probably the area where there's the most of the NextGen fibre up the west coast and around. And so West Australia is the environment where we've got some silly things happening. The key, of course, that most of us should be familiar with, which is CIR and PIR, in terms of how NBN Co tried to work out its business model. They then sat down and sort of thought of this idea of let's have an AVC and a CVC. From day one, everyone was horrified with this for two reasons. One was that it built a business model that was based upon the fact that if you have fibre, then it was an aspirational thing. People would go, oh, I've got fibre and it's great, so therefore I'm prepared to pay more to get 100/40. But of course, people are not getting fibre now, so therefore they're getting copper, which is up to 100/whatever. So therefore most people are going, well, I'm not going to pay if I'm not going to get it. And so most people are actually picking 12/1 or 25/5. And so you've got the reverse effect happening. So by changing the technology, you've actually got a big shift towards the slower speeds. The exact opposite is happening in New Zealand, and I'll talk about them a little bit in a minute. But New Zealand, of course, the exact opposite's happening. They started with fibre to the node. And everyone in New Zealand was picking slow speeds. They've shifted to fibre to the home, and they've got a target of doing 70% of the nation with fibre to the home. And since the shift, the same thing has happened where everyone is going, I want 100/40 in New Zealand. So they've now got 70 to 80% of customer connections are now on 100/40 in New Zealand. And so they're now raising up the list of average download speeds and so forth. They're the fastest riser on that list at the moment, right? We're the fastest faller on the list. They're going up, we're going down. And the difference with New Zealand to Australia, of course, is they have a flat fee for the connection. They don't have a CVC charge, this scenario that's killing us in Australia. They just simply have a flat fee. If you want a connection that's, I think it's 50/30, you pay $39 a month per customer connection. If you want 100/40, you pay $42 a month. Flat fee. Doesn't matter how much they use, $42 a month. Okay, so equivalent in Australia, on 100/40 with the typical types of usage that we've got in New Zealand. The price here is working out to about between $80 to $90 a month. That's the charge to NBN Co. In New Zealand, $40 a month. So you can see it's a no-brainer why we're going backwards and they're going forwards. And of course, people have argued that, well, that their business model won't work. Well, Chorus has posted 3 years with profit rising every year for the last 3 years. Now, of course, most of us in this room are not old enough to remember this. But of course, Nielsen's a guy in the United States who every time he buys a new modem or gets a new connection, he plots it on a graph. Now, I beat him because back here in 1982, I had a 30 board optocoupler. That was my first connection to the network. He didn't get down a 30 board. He had the next generation, which was about a 400 board optocoupler. I got that as my second device. And it was fantastic because you think I had a massive 100% improvement over what I had before, so that was pretty good. And I'm on track with him now. He's on cable at 100/40 in the United States, or he's on, he's on about 100/8. And I'm on Telstra, which is 100/2. So he's back in front. But Nielsen, of course, provides us with some evidence as to the trends, and that line keeps going up. Just on the screen here, I've got it asking for a font. I've never had it doing that before. Hopefully it'll go away. The history of the DSLs, the copper, we all know that you can get more speed out of copper. How many people here haven't seen 10 gigabits per second over Cat6? No one? What's the limitation? Of course, the distance. We can get 10 gig over copper. Everyone knows that. So the issue is, of course, is distance. The problem with the access network is that if you want to go to G.fast and XG.fast and all these other things, you need to keep shortening the copper. We all know the problems with that, is that that's going to mean more truck rolls. The most expensive part of rolling the network is the copper, is the truck rolls, right? Getting the people out there to actually do the work. That's the most expensive part of it. So you only want to go once out there every 50 or so years. You don't want to have to keep going back into the suburbs every 5 years. There's been a lot of talk about G.fast and XG.fast. It's leaked out of NBN Co recently that they are actually going to do fibre to the distribution point with VDSL2, which is what they intended to do all along from the very beginning, right? Because it does not suit their business model to offer customers any faster than VDSL2. If you provide 800,000 people with G.fast or XG.fast, then everyone else that's got fibre to the node which is 6.5 million Australians, they will immediately demand G.fast or XG.fast. So by using copper, NBN Co is actually going to force the nation to the lowest common denominator, right, which is VDSL2. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And there's a diagram, or a table, sorry, which gives us the ultimate figure down here, right? And that's on a really good day. So just think about that. So it becomes pointless, all this advertising and marketing and so forth about how fast we can get G.fast and XG.fast and all this in the lab, but it's out in the field that actually matters, right? And that's where it all comes apart. So it's something that, you know, does cause me a problem when I see so much rubbish in the media about G.fast and XG.fast and everything else. And of course, we should all remember this curve. And that's the thing that we just can't get away from. There's just no way around that curve. You just have to understand that that is the limitation. And so ultimately, when you start getting up into this area over here, then your distance of your copper gets to the point where it becomes very, very small. And so you might as well just allow the customer to put in the fibre into their own home if they want. Get the fibre in the street and then let them put the fibre into their own home. You don't need a licence to put fibre into a home. There's a company in Europe that's selling self-installation kits. You just pay for it on the web, comes in the mail, you put it in yourself. I mean, it's a no-brainer. But there's this problem in Australia against that Australians won't, you know, get off their backside and install it themselves. I think most people, if they had fibre in front of their home, I think they would install it themselves. I know, you know, people who have got no idea anything technical have said to me, you know, how hard is it? If they put it out there, can we install it ourselves? And I've said, no, you can't, because NBN Co won't allow you, even if there's a DPU in the front of your house. So that's the other thing that's leaked out of NBN Co, is that apparently they won't allow self-installation of fibre. The technologies, we should all be familiar with these. We've got fibre to the premise, fibre to the node, wireless, hybrid, fibre coax. All these technologies have got positive points to it. Many of us in this room know someone who's part of the multitude of companies trying to roll out wireless, fixed wireless in the hinterland in Queensland at the moment, right? If you Google it, there's about 30 companies trying to madly roll fixed wireless, you know, up the East Coast. And you've got entrepreneurs like Bevan Slattery and others that have gotten a lot of press recently about them getting into the wireless game. You just roll fibre somewhere, whack up a pole, and then start putting in point-to-point microwave links. There's been a lot of change in that area recently because there's now two types of microwave that's available, readily available, one which works in the 5 gigahertz band and one which works in the licensed 5.6 gigahertz band. The problem with putting fixed point-to-point microwave in 5 gigahertz is that you've immediately wiped out the 802.11 AC in the person's home. I've been getting a lot of people asking about that recently. Why is their Wi-Fi no longer working? And I've sort of said, is there anyone down the street using microwave? Oh, yeah, they told us it's better than the NBN. So, of course, I said, well, you're not going to have Wi-Fi anymore. Because, of course, you get leakage from these things, right? So if you have an angle on houses down a street, and if you've got a couple of houses close together with the different angles, you're going to get leakage and it'll wipe out the 802.11 AC in a home. So there's a lot of cowboys out there at the moment. If they use the 5.6 gigahertz band, it's not so bad, but it's still not as good as promised, because again, the angle off the pole to the different homes, if there's not sufficient gap between each of the homes with the point-to-point microwave, you get a lot of leakage between them, and the speeds drop off quite rapidly. Anyone that's been in the microwave game will know that. Hybrid fibre coax, we're going to build out, it's fantastic, hybrid fibre coax. We're going to use Telstra, we're going to use Optus, it's great. Everyone's going to, have hybrid fibre coax. Well, the election's finished, we won by 1 seat. Sorry about that. We're just not going to use as much hybrid fibre coax. We're going to ditch the Optus coax that we've been telling everyone we're going to use it. Sorry, that's all gone now. And some of the Telstra coax, well, we're not going to use that as well. And it's not looking so good as what they were telling us. And you've just got to shake your head. So hybrid fibre coax should have always been part of the NBN. It should have been part of the NBN, but only as a stopgap whilst the fibre was rolled. Because where you've got Telstra cable, it's generally quite reasonable. The problem, of course, with coax is that it was only ever built in Australia for 30% penetration, right? The NBN is going to expect to have 80% penetration. So you've got 30, 80. Now, anyone that's been in the HFC and Telstra will tell you that their network cannot handle what the NBN wants to put on it, which means the entire Telstra HFC has to be rebuilt to go from 30% penetration to 80% penetration. Forget about DOCSIS 3, DOCSIS 3.1, all that stuff's meaningless. It's the actual build of the network that's the issue. A fibre to the node, well, it's obsolete technology, we all know that, but for whatever reason, that's what they're doing. It's a disaster that shouldn't have happened. Fibre to the premises, I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later, and I'm not sure if you've seen what's been happening overseas, but I think you'll be shocked when I put up a slide a little bit later on, because it'll make you want to just go outside and cry. That's all right, you can cry here if you want. There's another diagram showing the same thing. This is, of course, what we would like to see happen, and that is that all of these different technologies come off OLTs, because if you have OLTs, then you can essentially you can replace these different boxes and upgrade. The problem that we have is that that's not what they're doing, is they're rolling out fibre to the node, which means that you don't have that. And then if you want to upgrade to any of these other things, you either have to put in an OLT or you start doing kludges, which is what NBN is proposing to do. So everyone's been hearing about we can have fibre to the distribution point. What people don't know is that it's going to be VDSL2 into the homes, and at this stage, it looks like they're actually going to be rolling that back to the nodes. So it's going to be Ethernet from the distribution point back to the node, where it's going to be plugged into the Alcatel-Lucent ISAM. So it's not going to be upgradable to fibre to the premises, right? And they've also been doing a kludge, which is the big patent that NBN Co's just lodged. We've all heard about this patent. They're actually going to be converting 4-port DPUs for fibre to the distribution point, and the fibre's going to go back, and they've got basically a port where they can plug it into the HFC network, right? So it's HFC to VDSL2, okay? So, yeah, there's a few more shocks to come out of, right? So there's a few more shocks to come our way, right? So this is the type of cowboy stuff that if your members are like this, you've got a problem. We all should know how passive optical network works at the moment. I'm assuming that you all do, so I won't go through how passive optical network works. It's basically encrypted on the way down because all the traffic goes to all the homes. It's not encrypted on the way back because the homes are bursting in particular time slots and the traffic doesn't go back to each of the homes. So it's encrypted on the way down, not encrypted on the way back. You would expect there to be encryption, though, at the application layer, right? So that's why it's not encrypted on the way back. It's a very nifty system, completely passive. You don't have to have electricity anywhere between the homes and the OLT. And it's a technology that people have been planning on, designing, building, and so forth for decades, right? It's actually been in standard form since about 2005, with product available around that time. It's been around for a long time now. Of course, GPON, which is what we're doing in Australia, is now obsolete. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We're up to the third version of PON. So we've already moved past that. This is what we really want, what fibre to distribution point was meant to be. But this fibre between the aggregation and the node, we wanted that to be GPON so we could upgrade. But of course, that's not what's happening. We've also got this sort of scenario here. 20 kilometres between the OLT, 80 metres maximum into the homes. You could do self-installation kits if this is an OLT. Okay, but if it's not an OLT, then this self-installation option isn't there. Now, self-installation, of course, could mean that a retail service provider signs you up and says, we'll install the fibre into your home as part of your package. It's a bit like saying to Telstra, well, sign me up for a mobile, and they say, well, we'll give you a handset. Right? It's just part of the deal. This is essentially what's happening, is that we've got fibre to the node zones, and where you've got a small group of homes that fall outside that zone, they're actually going from the ISAM out with fibre to fibre to distribution point out here, where that small group of homes is. The rest of the homes in the zone, of course, are on satellite, but there may be a small cluster of homes which they are able to do with fibre to distribution point, and that's going back into the ISAM. The same deal up here. We've got the three zones, fibre to the node, fixed wireless, then satellite. If we've got a zone of houses right on the edge, then it may be more efficient to actually do fibre and fibre to distribution point out here with the group on the edge of that zone. The third generation of passive optical network, we've got now much more upstream and downstream. It's 40 gigabit /10, whereas GPON, of course, was 2.5/1. I'll just go through these next couple of slides very quickly because we should have all seen them. The NTD, the box on the outside of the home, the actual network itself, the connectivity into the homes down the street with the fibres to the pits under the street or over the street as it may be, the layouts in the actual areas, the fibre serving areas. The original idea was to have reliability and redundancy by having loops of fibres, and of course that's all gone now. They're moved to a star networks, so there's no reliability and redundancy. And of course that would all aggregate back and you would have all this connectivity within a fibre serving area which would go to a POI. Now at this stage, POIs only have one fibre serving area. Some of the POIs in the more populated areas were going to have two, but of course some of them have now got none. The actual connectivity, points of interconnect to the premises, the pits and cabinets out on the street, the fixed wireless microwave with the microwave transits over here, the fixed wireless aggregation, which takes us back to what we call a wireless serving area, similar to the fibre serving area. There are about 80,000 homes that are going to be in the fixed wireless footprint. The satellites, a lot has been said about them. We've read about them. We've got all these little zones around the country. The 2 satellites are going to be servicing those zones. 400,000 premises in those zones. When they estimate about 50% will connect. If all 50% connect, then they're going to be heavily congested. Well, they need another satellite at that point. And of course the technical details. So what went wrong? Well, the first thing of course was that Telstra should have been split in 2. Most of us accept and recognise that. It should have been split in 2 back in 2005. Shareholders should have got 1 share in each entity. They did this in 2012 in New Zealand to their version of Telstra. Both sides of that split company, which are now 2 companies, Chorus and Spark, both companies have actually increased their profit because they're freed up from each other. They can focus. One can focus on retail and the other one can focus on wholesale. And so they can do better at what they're doing. The problem was that didn't happen. And so then Labor decided on this kludge to create the NBN and try and force Telstra to hand over its access network. Well, that didn't work either because there was so many caveats and gotchas in the contracts. For example, all the pit stops traps were still owned by Telstra and leased by NBN Co. The exchanges are owned by Telstra and leased by NBN Co. The number of little catches in those contracts just went on and on and on. And so some people have estimated that it will end up costing over the 30 years, it'll end up costing NBN Co over $90 billion. So it's not $11 billion, it's $90 billion. So that's been an ongoing problem from the very beginning. And of course, the 18 months it took to negotiate the original contract with Telstra blew out the timeline. Everything slid by 18 months. And the problem, of course, is that just happened again at the election in 2013. So you lost another 18 months renegotiating with Telstra. And so what that did was it caused us to go into this scenario where we're about 4 million premises now and we've got to get up to here. And so all of a sudden they've got to literally take this vertical to get back on track if they're going to get everything done by 2020. And as we've seen, that's just not happening. If you have a 10-year project, the last thing you want to do is spend 3 years negotiating with Telstra, right? It's just nonsense. Government intervention. Knowing when it is time to intervene is an insight. Knowing how to intervene without making a situation worse is a gift, right? Telecommunications policy in Australia has been very bad for a while now, right? And we've just seen the intervention going from bad to worse. I've talked about Telstra. The bottom line is that Telstra has resold the copper to NBN Co now 3 times that I can count. And the amount of money they're getting is just absolutely phenomenal because HFC and copper were fantastic. What has happened is that NBN Co has now contracted Telstra to upgrade the copper and the HFC. Right? Something that they should have been doing for free at the start because they were trying to sell this stuff. So they're paying them again and again and again. It's phenomenal what's going on with Telstra. But if you're a Telstra shareholder, fantastic. I mean, seriously, if I was a Telstra shareholder, I'd be demanding that they sell that copper 5 or 6 times, right? They've still got 4 years to go, okay? So if the management team can't sell the copper 5 or 6 times, I'd be just demanding that the management team resign. Surely they can find some other bunny rabbit in the government or NBN Co they can sell it to again. Multi-technology mix, it's a classic engineering argument. Overbuild versus upgrade. The whole argument that's being pushed by the coalition is that we can upgrade fibre to the node, right? We can upgrade it. We can do this, we can do that, we can upgrade it. And they're selling that very well. A lot of people I know have actually bought this idea that they can upgrade this fibre to the node. However, when you actually look at the life cycle cost over 30 years, it'll end up costing double versus going out and just simply overbuilding with fibre from the very start. So, of course, there's a lot of promises have been made with the HFC. I've always argued the HFC should have been used as part of the NBN. They'd bought it from Telstra, they should have simply connected it as it was and not done anything more with it. Just simply used it as it was. And then over time replaced it with fibre. The construction's been a big problem because they've outsourced the construction from day one. And the Australian construction industry and the construction companies know how to make lots of money out of this stuff. And so it has cost huge amounts of money, more than what it should have, because the industry has created all these intermediate construction companies that just simply take more than what they should be out of the industry. So it's been a very unfortunate scenario with construction. In the Northern Territory, of course, many of us will remember that Cynthia was sacked. It was just a disaster up there. And a person that I know, or came to know, was put in charge of actually rolling fibre to the premises in the Northern Territory. He was an NBN Co employee, so NBN Co dealt directly with the mum and dad contractors that were rolling out the fibre to the premises in the Northern Territory. He finished the Northern Territory rollout a year in advance of the deadline, at 80% of the budget that had been allocated. He's now rolling out fibre to the premises in the Caribbean, right? So he was a POM, he came to Northern Territory, did the rollout there, he's gone to the Caribbean, he's rolling out fibre to the premise in 3 of the islands in the Caribbean, and I get email from him going, isn't this fantastic? The backhaul. As most of us will know, the ACCC reduced the backhaul costs in some areas recently by 78%. It's still the most expensive backhaul in Australia. So the biggest problem with the NBN is the fact that there's no connectivity. Once you get to the poise, you pay through the nose. Now that's all right if you're operating in the cities, but there are some areas where the only connectivity back is going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? The backhaul costs in Australia are just phenomenally over the top. And a lot of RSPs and companies are complaining about backhaul. Wi-Fi, of course, is very big. Telstra, one of the biggest decisions that Telstra's made probably the last 30 years is to roll out a Wi-Fi network. We don't have time to talk about it tonight, but in the last 30 years, that's number 1 or 2 of the top 2 decisions made by Telstra, in my view, because it means that they're creating a completely new national network. All you've got to do in the future is come out to these boxes, pull the Wi-Fi out, and what do you put in there? 5G. So they're building a network faster than Optus and Vodafone have ever seen. Now this particular box here, I'll just remind you all, guess who paid for that? USO, right? They're going to come along, they're going to simply replace this with 5G, with a picocell, macro cell, whatever you like, okay? And away they go. And they're going to put it into everyone that's a Telstra customer into their homes. Remember, the whole point of the Air network is that you've got these access points that provide, Telstra Air in people's homes, right? Smartest decision that Telstra's made probably in about 30 years, right? Very, very smart. Talking about 5G, we haven't got time, but anyway, let's talk about 5G for a second. What does 5G mean? More wireless? Better wireless? 5G means only one thing: more fibre. Recently at the World Broadband Forum, one of the major proponents behind 5G put up a slide. You can Google it and see it. And he showed that the only way that 5G will work is if you have an exponential number of endpoints of fibre being installed. So everything that you want for 5G, you need more fibre, right? And this guy was asked, well, what do you mean by this? And he said, put fibre into every home. Because, of course, what we're going to put into every home is what? A femtocell, picocell, into every home. And how does this all work? You've got to have reliability, you've got to have low latency, you've got to have fibre. So 5G actually means more fibre. Universal access, something that's important to think about for the future, and the idea of that is that the USO is important, but you've got to take it to the next level. And that is that every Australian needs access to the network, right? So some people would need to get free access. Some people subsidised access. Some people would have to pay the full price. But in the future, we need every Australian to be connected to the network. What happens in December 2020? Well, the NBN can be sold. Will it be sold in December 2020? No. Reason why? It'll be a shambles. There's just so many problems they're going to have to sort out before they sell it off, right? And not only that, as we all know recently, because there was a major report put out by one of these big consulting companies, Because they're using copper, NBN Co is going to actually only be worth half of the cost of building it. So it's going to cost 50, 60 billion to build, but it's only going to be worth 25 billion. Right? Because, you know, who wants to buy a car with 2 broken wheels and no engine? Right? So don't expect it to be sold in, you know, at the start of 2021. Right, let's get on to some really good stuff to finish it off. A few slides here. What's happening at the moment? Well, yeah, we've got up to about 2.9 million premises ready for service. They've recently been turning on some of the HFC and other things, the satellites, so they claim to have gotten closer to 4 million premises that have been passed, right? Not ready for service, but passed. They've got to get to 12 million. They've got 4 years. It's going to be fun watching this race. So the revenues are going up and all the rest of that is going up. The ARPU is sort of okay at the moment, which is $42, but it could all come crashing down if they don't sort out their business model and also getting the connectivity up. And yes, the CEO of NBN Co did admit at the World Broadband Forum last week that they've got a problem, right? That they have to get the connections done or they're in trouble. Dodgy figures. The biggest one, of course, is this rubbish over here about the cost of fibre to the premises installation. NBN Co has now admitted that they have been continuing to use the cost of the original contracts that were put with the contractors for installing fibre to the premises, right? The original contracts. And of course, as we know, $700 of that was this dodgy adding in all the lease costs for the pit ducts, traps and so forth. So they're adding in OPEX into the CAPEX to try and make that look as big as possible over there. Okay. And of course, with fibre to the node, you don't get what you promised. Right? So have a look at that, and that's out of NBN Co's report. But if you look at it carefully, you will see that there's a lot of Australians that are actually going to get dudded. Right? So 100% they promise will get 25.5. But 14% are not going to get any better. 14% of Australians, right? Now remember that the satellite people and the fixed wireless are only 7%. So that means that 7% of urban population are not going to get any better than if they were living in the middle of the outback. Right? So there's a good reason to tree change, right? Because your NBN's not going to be any better. You might as well move into the bush. 32% are not going to get 100 megabits per second, right? So that's 1 in 3 homes are going to get up to somewhere between 50 and 100. 30%, that's 1 in 3. Right, so it's pretty bad. Now let's look at New Zealand, those people that we don't like across the ditch. So they only have 2 fixed prices, $39 and $42, right? And I don't know why this one's $39.50, probably because the New Zealanders couldn't round off. They've got a total population of about the same as Victoria, 3.5 million or whatever, right? But we have to remember this whole thing about New Zealand's not Australia. They've got mountains. We don't have mountains. And they've got big rivers. We don't have big rivers, right? Not like they do. And their rivers actually flow rapidly all year round. So it's not a way of saying that Australia, we've got all these problems that they don't have or vice versa. Nowadays, it doesn't take much to roll a fibre, really. The issue is, of course, is that if you look, because of this fixed price, everyone is jumping on the 140. Because if you've got a fixed price, why wouldn't you? You've got to remember that it's all you can eat, right? No data usage charge, so it's all you can eat. Interestingly enough, they've found that the average people in New Zealand, even with a fixed price, all you can eat, they're not using any more than, you know, the average people in Australia that are on the 140 fibre. It's about the same. Just because they've got all you can eat doesn't mean that they are gouging themselves, right? There's only a certain amount of Netflix you can watch in a week, right? They do, yeah. They have a couple of companies. It's in. It's.
We've only got one, right? We've only got a Foxtel, and that's pretty much it.
Don't tell Optus and they thought that, right? But
They've got Roof Edge or whatever.
yeah. So, but they're like us. They've got a few companies in that marketplace, right? Because it's like, you know, there's an incumbent that has all the rights to sport, and that's what people basically buy Foxtel for, is sport, right? And they have equivalent to that, you know. So, but I noticed recently that Foxtel have said they're now going to offer Netflix over Foxtel. So, the issue is though, is that slide alone is enough to make an Australian cry, because New Zealanders are all getting 140, all you can eat, getting their Netflix at 40, you know, at $42 a month, right? And that's New Zealand dollars, right? It's not worth as much. Now, if you want to make it, if you want to, oh, is it? Oh, okay. If you want to really get down and cry, this is what's happening in New Zealand with their fibre to the home costs. Now, they started out, like us, learning how to install fibre to the home. So unbelievably, if you look at their original costs, they're about the same as us. But then see what happened after that. Guess what the cost of rolling fibre into New Zealand is now? Connecting actually into the home. It's about $2,600 a premise. And yet NBN Co still tell us annually, in their annual report, $4,400. And yet New Zealand, which is pretty much matching the rest of the world, $2,600. Now you notice this green part, that's the cost of actually pulling it from the street into your home. So the New Zealanders, of course, have been very smart. And what they've said is that if companies want to sign up customers, they can pre-sell that and say that if you sign up with us, we'll do that for free and we'll get it done really quick, right? So they've actually been, you know, getting it cheaper for themselves by getting other people to do it. So they're down now to $2,600. And that's what it should be here. Now, if you take that and compare it with fibre to the node, it's an absolute no-brainer, right? Because the fibre to the node is about $2,000 if you really look at all the costs per premise. Now, you've got fibre into the home for $2,600. You've got, and $600. I mean, that's less than the cost of most of the mobile phones that I've seen in your pockets. Think about it, right? It's a no-brainer, isn't it? Sorry? Well, for 50 to 80 years. You only do it once, then that fibre's got a 50-year lifetime. But Corning have said that they believe it will last 80 years. But you know, you can't believe Corning, can you? The other thing that really gets up my nose is that almost on a daily basis, we have ministers and we have the head of NBN Co and so forth carting on about, you know, how wonderful the copper is. Well, let's look at some facts. In the world, what's happening in the rest of the world? Well, let's have a look at the first slide, which is a slide which shows us quarter 4, 2014, through to quarter 4, 2015. Now, if you look at this, you will see that the grey area, which is fibre to the home, is getting bigger. And if you look at the blue area, which is the copper, it's getting smaller. Now, if you look at the cable, right, which of course there's a lot of cable in America, I mean, it's everywhere, this is now bigger than this. There's now more fibre to the home in the world than cable. Now, let's just remind ourselves, yes, we've been installing cable since 1941. We've only been installing fibre to the home since about 2008. So let's think. One took us 65 years to get to that, and the other one has taken 8 years. And yet we have all these ministers and everyone else telling us how DOCSIS 3.1 and cable is so wonderful, right? It's just not logical. Why is the rest of the world rolling fibre? Is there something we don't know, right? Okay, now let's have a look at this last slide, which will give you something to interest ourselves in. So hopefully you can read it. So this line here, which I must admit's not, not very big, that's the fibre to the home being rolled out in the world. Right? Okay? Right? Now, hang on, I have to search for it. Oh, here it is. I can see it. It's just there. That's fibre to the node. Fibre to the home, fibre to the node. Right? That 4.5%, that's Australia. Because we're the only idiots that would do it. Right? Oh, and satellite. You need satellite because satellite's important. Fixed wireless, that's probably Australia too, right? Okay, 80,000 premises, 6%. But this is the whole world, right? Copper, going backwards fast. But don't forget, that's the actual copper network, right? So we would expect that to keep going backwards rapidly over time. Fibre to the node, which includes fibre to the basement, fibre to the curb, whatever you want to call it. Copper going backwards, cable in the United States mainly, and Australia, 6.5%. Fibre to the home. So the next time that you hear a minister or the head of NBN or someone tell you how wonderful fibre to the node is and how it's wonderful in the UK and how it's wonderful, the reality is this. Okay, so these figures are from Point Topic, which is the company that collects all the data, reputable data around the world. There's no argument with their figures. Their figures are correct. You can't dispute them. So there might be a 3% error, like any sort of figures, but that's the big one. Now that has been going quarter after quarter like that now for about the last 3 years. So you can go on their website and you can look at every quarter going back for 10, 20 years. And that has been consistently like this now for, as far as I can see, for about 3 years. At that level. It has been growing before that. Slowly grew, but realistically now it's like this. And so that's where we're at with fibre to the home. There's a reason for this, and there's a reason why people are going with fibre, right? And part of that reason is 5G. And so really, for your membership in that, the more fibre that you've got, the more 5G that you'll get, the more data that you'll get through your networks, right? 5G is not the enemy of optical. Anyone that says to you that 5G is going to replace optic fibre just doesn't know what they're talking about, right? 5G is the best thing for optic fibre that I've seen for a long time, right? It's going to be absolutely fantastic. But 5G does not work well over cable or copper. Reason being, it needs the reliability of the transport and it needs low latency, okay? And so all the major proponents of 5G, the technical people, the scientific people, have laughed every time someone's talked about 5G and copper and cable. They will only talk about 5G with fibre, right? And so, that's a really big thing. So that's a bit of an expose in a few minutes. Are there any questions? Yep.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. Incredibly insightful. Love the data. So as an industry association, if we are to turn this ship around or do anything to turn this ship around or make the graphs go in the fibre direction, what can we do?
I wouldn't. You don't want to go anywhere near what Internet Australia is doing at the moment. I would just simply, if I was going to be doing anything at the moment...
Watch it burn, in other words.
No, if your executive was going to do anything at the moment, I would get your executive to put in a submission to the government's review of ACAN. Right? They announced it today that there's going to be a review of ACAN. ACAN is paid for by the industry and they advocate for consumers. So what you'd be doing is advocating for an organisation that advocates for consumers. Because the more that consumers get, the better it is for you, right? And that's what I'd be doing, right? And realistically, the future for you is fibre. But there's two futures for your members. One is NBN and I've been talking with some of your executive about that today, and I think what they're planning on doing or what they may do is very positive. But the other thing that you've got to also take into account is facilitating and learning about 5G. Because your network today is not 5G compatible, because there is no network in Australia that's 5G compatible, right? So what I'm talking about is that the only way that 5G works is that there has to be, systems put in place, new systems to allow for very low latency and, very high reliability, right? And so we're going to have to see a lot of re-engineering. The firm details of how you would build an optical network for 5G, we should expect to see those firm details in about 2019. So if anything, I would be reading as much as I could. It's a bit weird to tell optical people to read about 5G, but I would be reading everything I could about 5G, because the more you know about 5G, the better your optical network's going to be. Does that make sense? Weird, isn't it?
Still not going to change the NBN.
Stay away from it, right?
Sorry. Thanks for the talk. It was wild. Lots of numbers. Good numbers. There was one number I missed. Who's paying for the power for the nodes? According to my just back of the envelope, back of the tablet, if it's pulling 2 kilowatts of power, which wouldn't be wild, that's about $13 a day.
75,000 to 80,000 a year on a special price.
Actually, a while ago there was some talk about this. I think it was Hackett was talking about it. I think they budgeted for about, I think it was 5 million a year for power for the nodes, but that's a piss in the pot realistically. So.
Oh, yeah, no. The power, the power cost is the power cost of the fibre to the node, because of the nodes and other things they've got to have in the network and so forth. If I remember, and I might be wrong because my brain's not totally working, I think that it was worked out, it's about 50 million a year. Right? So that's on top of, yes, the fact that GPON doesn't require power between here and here, right?
And batteries as well. Recycling all the batteries in the nodes, zero battery backup as well.
Yeah, so I think that the power costs, including the batteries, worked out to about 50 million. But that was excluding things like the recycling costs of the batteries and so forth, right? So, yeah, it's a significant and growing cost.
We saw Optus a couple of stick for the CVC bandwidth for people on fibre to the node. I was wondering, the amount that NBN have provisioned to their ISAMs seems, from what I've read, that could be a significant limitation as well. I think I've seen they're only running 1 or 2 pairs of fibre or something at a gig.
The original design of the network had a clause in it saying that if a link got to 70% of capacity, then it was to be immediately upgraded, right? So it would go from a 1 gig to 10 gig type thing, right? And Gary McLaren put that in the original design document. In 2013, when they changed governments, they rewrote the design document. They went from a ring network to a star network. So they took out all the reliability redundancy. And one of the other clauses they took out was this 70% trigger. So all the triggers went out. And so what they are doing now, which is an issue, is that all of these links are now being essentially, stuck at 1 gig, right? And so there are places where the RSPs have been saying, no, the problem is actually NBN Co, because NBN Co has been saying it's the RSPs. And so you've got this war going on as to who's to blame, right? The biggest problem is that the design documents are rubbish, that are being given to the ACCC. They're actually rubbish. They're meaningless. And, the fixed wireless people are complaining bitterly because they're 100 megabit links. There are 64 homes, right, hanging off 100 megabits. So you work it out, right? Okay, they're meant to have been upgraded, again, if the traffic grew, as more homes got connected to towers, but they haven't been upgrading them. So, yeah, and they're not going to now because they can't expend the money, right? Because once you've built something badly, they don't have the operating budget to go back and replace it.
I'll actually have a question. What do you see as the ACCC's sort of role in all of this? Firstly, changing all the poise from the small amount that we had to what we've got now, and is there any way we can at least fix that part of the problem, regardless of access technology? I personally see the CVC and backhaul problems as being the biggest problem we're going to have with this network in the next 10 years. Do you think there's anything we do to fix that?
There's nothing that the ACCC can do, because under the legislation, the business model is up to NBN Co, right? They're essentially a business company, and they've put together a business model, right, which has got the AVC and the CVC. The only people that can actually decide to, for example, go to a fixed price like New Zealand, the only people that can do that is NBN Co. And recently, Bill Morrow said, we aren't doing that. We're going to review the CVC charges, and they're likely to come down in March next year to reduce the CVC charges further. But he said that we are not changing the model from what it is at the moment, right? So, because if they, look, the problem is if you change the model to a fixed price, then everyone is going to want 140, aren't they? Right? Whereas at the moment, the way the model works is that we're paying more than New Zealand, but everyone's getting 12.1 or 25.5. So therefore that suits the government. Got to remember the government paid a huge amount of money to get some experts from the other side of the world. Oh, sorry, I went too far there. They're not experts. They just claim to be experts. From the other side of the world, right, to come to Australia and tell us that we'll only ever need 23 megabits per second for the whole house. In the year 2023, we're only going to need 23 megabits per second, right?
The problem I saw when we had the original CVC pricing and stuff, when we only had 6 POIs or 8 or however many it was in the metro areas, you can do oversubscription a lot better when you're only having to deal with a handful of backhaul links. And the CVC pricing wasn't so much of a problem at that point because you could contend it in a couple of places and your oversubscription ratios were easier to handle. But now you've got, like, for example, I think it's like Cannington here in Perth, like IANET has to have multiple POIs or multiple connections down there. And you've got contention issues even there on fibre to the premise and fibre to the node, and they're having to constantly flip people between those CVCs to try and keep things balanced.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what I mean. I think either the amount of POIs needs to come back down to where it was, or the CVC charge needs to be drastically dropped or abolished.
I think you have to understand that by having 121 POIs, there are only 3 companies that can actually offer NBN services, because they're the only companies that can actually afford to pay the AVC and CVC charges across all the sub-networks, the 121 networks. So if you're a tiny company, your only option is to go through someone that's acting as a wholesaler, right? So an access seeker that's acting as a wholesaler. And of course, they're going to add in a nice big profit for themselves. So all the small companies have basically got nowhere to go, right? They're going to have to pay over the top prices to actually get access to all of this. In New Zealand, with the flat price access, it's a flat price for everyone. There's no CVC. So they've actually got mum and dads and kids, 16-year-old kids and that, springing up, becoming resellers from their backyard, right? Because it's a flat price. The model in Australia was designed so that only the big 4 can offer services over the NBN. And we're seeing that with the take-up, right? I mean, everyone saw the figures that 80% of something of NBN connections are Telstra. What a disaster for everyone.
Yeah, thanks for the information. It's great. But I think I'm getting the impression that this is very much about it's degenerating into a technical debate now. What happened to the original purpose of why we need an NBN? The fact that, right, you said at the beginning, the digital economy, global, how businesses can actually change what they do and do new things. And I think that as soon as you talk about the technical stuff, politicians' eyes are going to glaze over. There seems to be a total lack of, the NBN just means you get more Netflix and you get your YouTube without buffering or something. Where's the real push about new businesses being able to do new things using fibre to the premises, and therefore what homes can get out of that as well, so whether it's telemedicine, whether it's education, whether it's totally new businesses we haven't thought of. What's your view on perhaps they're the arguments that should be put up to try and get this back on track?
You're 100% correct. All the technology arguments are pointless, meaningless, mean nothing. The only technology argument that matters is the fact that with fibre you can get low latency. Anything else is meaningless, right? It's irrelevant. Why do you need low latency? You need low latency for modern applications, for 5G, for for the types of applications that we want to have in the future, which is artificial intelligence, education, health, and so on. Now, are we seeing these new applications, right? We are, yes, because you've got all these companies, Google and everyone else, about to start providing these, Oculus and virtual reality and all the rest of this, right? Now, if you look at those environments, they're not new. We had virtual reality, Second Life and all that stuff 15 years ago, right? But we needed a platform to be able to deliver it. And that's what this is all about. The mistake that the government made back in 2005 was not clearly enunciating what it was that this network was meant to be. And they should have enunciated it in terms of saying that everyone in Australia is to be connected at 100/40 by this date, 1 gigabit / 400 by this date, 10 gigabits / 4 gigabits by this date. How the industry does it, I don't care. If they want to use fixed wireless, if they want to use microwave, fibre, whatever, who cares? But the technical things, it should have certain latency requirements and it should have other things. And then the industry could go into it. If you look at Netflix, of course, Netflix were sitting there waiting for Australia to get a certain momentum with the NBN so that the NBN could carry the traffic it wanted to offer. As soon as it believed that there was enough connectivity in Australia for them to come into the country and actually make an offering, they jumped in. And the problem that we've got is, of course, that all the companies that want to offer all these other things can't come here. Google has publicly said they've now put Australia on the back burner in terms of some of the offerings that they wanted to bring in. And they're not the only company that's done that. Others have said Australia is now on the back burner, right? They're pushing into Asia, they're pushing into Europe. The thing I like to use as an example is that a DVD, a standard Blu-ray DVD, right? It streams between 30 to 40 megabits per second. And yet, over the NBN, we're told that 5 megabits per second is good enough. It's not, if you've ever looked at the two side by side, right? Try and watch sport over the NBN. It's horrible. In France, a company has started to stream 4K TV at 75 megabits per second. Here, 25 megabits per second on a good day, if your connection can handle it, right? And it leaked out of Netflix that only a small percentage of people are actually getting the 25 megabits per second they talk about on their website, because their system automatically downs your bandwidth based on your connection. So there's only a very small percentage that are actually getting the 25 megabits per second they say that they'll stream the 4K at, right? So we're on the back burner in terms of all the big companies with all the big products that we should see over time. But it's also hurting our industry. I get companies contacting me all the time saying we want to develop a new education or a new health act or whatever, and we can't, because what we want to do, we can't deliver it here. So what do we do? And I just simply tell them, we'll leave. Go to Asia, go to somewhere where you've got the network connectivity that is going to permit you to actually go ahead with your app or your network and what you're doing. And there are actually companies that are doing really nifty things now with new services and virtual reality and everything else, but their markets are Asia. And so we're on the back burner from there. The politics shouldn't have been there. But the problem that the Howard government had in 2005 was that they did a straw poll amongst their members and everything like that. And everyone kept telling Howard 1.5 million Telstra shareholders. If you split Telstra, 1.5 million shareholders will get scared and they will all vote against you and you will lose the election. Right? So you should have done it. Right? But you saw what happened at the AGM, the last AGM of Telstra. Right? How many people saw what happened? The whole idea of declaring mobile roaming. The CEO of Telstra got up and started a scare campaign. They had people on the floor standing up saying every Telstra shareholder should vote against, you know, a government if they allow mobile roaming to be declared. Start a campaign to have the ACCC wound up. I mean, if you get a chance, you should actually look at what happened at the Telstra AGM. It was just straight hysterical fever that was going on at that AGM, right? Unbelievable. I haven't seen anything like it. But that's the danger of Telstra, is that government's not prepared to do anything to change Telstra because they're afraid of that shareholding problem, right? New Zealand, unbelievably, a Conservative government, 2012, someone I know wrote a report for their government saying, do this, do this, do this. The government implemented everything he suggested in this report. He announced Telecom New Zealand will be split. They have got 6 months to split. Chorus, shareholders will get 1 share in each. These are going to be the benefits and so forth. And look, New Zealand's going gangbusters. You know, but politicians here are dead scared. And anyone that believes that Malcolm Turnbull is a tech prime minister or whatever has absolutely no idea of reality, right? So, okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Terrific.
Thank you.